I just want to do a survey of the room, just to understand who I'm talking to before we start. So if you're still awake, can you put your hand up? That's, oh, not bad. Okay. That's, if you're an actuary or a data scientist, put your hand up. Okay. If you work for an insurance carrier, okay, got quite a few of those. And last question, who's already utilizing optimization, advanced pricing, earnings techniques? And who's thinking about it? Okay, so I think the room might actually be ahead of me, but okay. So this is me. I was introduced, so I'm going to skip that. I'll just point out that in Israel, I am in charge of both reserving and pricing, and therefore I don't get the excuse that people use elsewhere that say, I don't know, that's what pricing actuary told me, and that's what reserving actuary told me. That doesn't fly because I'm the same person. I tried it. It didn't work. Menorah is one of the 5 big insurance companies in Israel. We're a composite insurer, cover pension, life, health, general. The non-life business, over 3 billion shekels worth of premium. So what's that about? What do I put here? About 100 million pounds. Most of that in motor, 55% in motor. And we've been the most profitable motor insurer in Israel in the last 2 years. And before I move on, I'm just going to step back. I realized I probably need to introduce, I didn't put a slide in, the Israeli regulatory environment, the Israeli market. So the Israeli motor market is competitive. We have 16 active insurance companies in the motor market. The policies are all standardized. You can only add on, so pretty much it's standard. So we're competing on price or service, and service is generally not the major factor. In terms of the regulatory environment, we are regulated, in theory, highly. We have to file our tariff before we can use it. In practice, there's a split between the motor bodily injury, which is really highly regulated, and there we have to charge exactly what we filed, with no difference whatsoever. And there's a website that you can go in and check how much everyone's offering. On the motor property side, the two are split. So in theory, we have an approved tariff. In practice, every company has left themselves, and I'm being recorded, so I'm going to be somewhat careful about what I say. Most companies have left themselves enough wiggle room that they can move their prices up and down a considerable amount without having to worry about the regulation. And the regulator, and again, I'm going to be careful here, hasn't yet said anything specific about optimization in pricing. So, as everyone, most of the people here are already using various techniques, so why optimization is probably preaching to the choir. But anyway, so we want to add intelligence to what we're doing, right? We want to move away from the one-size-fits-all model. We want to add, in addition to the general risk characteristics that we know and love, the basic, tables from your GLMs, you want to add something that's more intelligent than that. And especially in renewal, which we found. In Menorah, we had very simple, basic rules. We knew we could put everyone up, a small amount or down a small amount, but we weren't doing anything intelligent at all in that business. And therefore, we said, this is part of our strategy. We want to go forward. We want to be able to have stuff that's more intelligent. We want to be able to give more personalized pricing. And we want to be able to identify the clients who we want, and possibly more importantly, identify the clients we don't want, and be able to deal with that at the level when they were coming in or at renewal time. And in particular, it's a dog-eat-dog world, as I think has been mentioned already several times today and yesterday. And therefore, if someone else gets into the market and uses these factors before we do, so there's going to be anti-selection. And therefore, using something that's more intelligent, something that's more strategic, is our anti-selection. If we can get there first, then we can get the competitive advantage. And that's why we felt it was important. And we got the management to sign on. And we said, OK, let's going to start our journey. And we started with renewals. So the question is, why start with renewals? Why optimize first on renewals? And I'll tell you why. We've had a lot of discussions the last day and a half. AI, generative AI, agentic AI. What did we have this morning? Communicative, collaborative AI. I'm not entirely sure what I've lost track of the words. I'm going to take you back like a long way. I'm going to talk about legacy systems, right? That's my big challenge. AI is like somewhere so far in the future, I'm not quite sure I can see it yet. I'm dealing with legacy systems, and I said, okay, how's my best way to get something that's intelligent into my company, given that my legacy system is a mainframe, closed box that doesn't know how to talk to anyone else? What am I going to do? So we said, let's start with renewals. I think Ernix started with renewals when Ernix first started. They started with renewals 20 years ago. We're just catching up. And why renewals? So firstly, because we've got the data, right? So obviously, all the actuaries, data scientists out here, we know that the data is what's important. When we're talking renewals, you've got an existing data, you've got existing policy holder, you have all the information that you need, you can go away and look at it. And we said, okay, we've got time also, like we've got data, we can now come along and we can look at each policy at the individual level and say, okay, what can we add to this policy? Like it's not something we're coming along and having to provide a quote in seconds, milliseconds, in order to be able to deal with it. And we've got time to look at it and make sure we know what we're doing. Systems. I discussed systems. As I said, we've got our legacy mainframe data. For those people, I'm going to for the data people out there, our system still stores policy information in one long ASCII string, which is divided by positions depending on the version of the policy. So you have to know that the policy number is positions 0 to 10, and then 11 to, and it changes things without telling anyone. So maybe, I'm hopeful, we'll find some AI that's able to read backwards and tell us what the system's doing, because at the moment it's very challenging. And therefore we said, okay, let's start with renewals because I know what's going on. I can break into it at a level where we say, okay, as the renewal's coming up, I've got time. I'm going to stop the system. I'm going to get in. And I'm going to be able to change what I want to change in order to be able to handle it. So, what are the challenges? And here, I think, despite talking about legacy systems and despite talking about the basic optimization in renewal, I think some of the lessons here can be used and are relevant for talking about using AI going forward, or other systems, because I think they're going to be similar. So firstly, what challenge did I have? So the first challenge we had when we looked at what the system was producing was that no one really knew what the answer was coming out. We had these systems, legacy systems, as I say, it's been 25 years, I think the policy system's been up and running. There's all sorts of business rules in there buried deep in the system. We'd put in a renewal policy and you didn't quite know what the result was going to be when it came out the other end, right? We could suggest we want to put prices up over the 5% on renewal on average. We'd get 4.5%, 4%, 5.5%. Why? We didn't know, right? Because there's stuff in there buried deep in the system. No one remembers. No one knows how it's working. And that was one of our challenges. Our second challenge is the fact that we work in the Israeli market. I think 80% in the market and 85% of Menorah's business is done through agents. The rest of it is direct. And agents are their own people. And therefore, we could put in what we wanted on renewal. We had no idea what came out the other end. We saw more than once where we said, okay, it's time for renewal, we need to increase prices. The loss ratio is not good. You put in the increase, and you watch the discounts the agent's giving go up straight in line. And therefore, that was a challenge we needed to overcome. How do we do that? So, what was our journey? So our journey was and we'll look at the timeline in a second. We said, okay, we realize it's something we're not going to be able to do ourselves. We're happy to take on software that's going to help us do that. We'll have Ernix. And when we have Ernix on board, our journey is going to be straightforward down the highway towards advanced pricing. What we got was that, which I didn't realize was an accurate picture of London over the last few days, for those people who've been trying to get from one side to the other. And I said that, like, well, what's going on? What happened? Why did we not get what was promised to us? And I will say at the outset, it's not Ernix's fault, okay? So what happened? So my timeline, what did we expect? We signed a contract with Ernix in June 2023, and I said, perfect. Middle of the year, 6 months, I'll allow myself, we're going to learn the system, we're going to see how it all works, we can run some price tests, we can get the data in that we need, build some models January, February, we'll be going live with the models in February for the April renewals. What happened in practice, we signed the contract on time. We then spent the next 5 months talking about IT and cybersecurity, and we'll discuss that in 1 second. We spent another 6 months working out changes to the policy system, how to break out of that closed box that we had before. Then we finally got around to running a price test, and we were actually, the 2 months to build the model was the easy bit, I think. And finally we went live in December, and actually managed to do it for February renewals. So pretty much a year behind schedule. And I'm sure that's never happened to anyone else here in terms of large projects, so that's a unique experience for us. So why did that happen? So firstly, cybersecurity. We are clearly the first and only company ever in the world to put data in the cloud, right? And no one's done it before, and therefore everything had to be checked and double-checked. And I'm sure that if we had that problem with putting stuff in the cloud for Ernix, using AI is going to be even worse. So therefore, anyone who's planning these projects, I would suggest start thinking about how you bring your IT and data security and cybersecurity online very, very early, because that's our first experience here. We thought we'd had it checked out before we signed the contract. Obviously, we went to the cyber team and we said, is this good enough? And they looked at it and they asked Ernix questions and they came back and they said, yeah, that's all fine. We signed the contract and we said, okay, we're ready to put the data in the cloud. And they said, wait a moment, not so fast. We said in principle it was fine. Now we actually have to test and make sure it's fine. We have to do a penetration test. We have to go away and make them sign all these questionnaires. It took a long time. And therefore I would suggest that, if that was for something that's relatively straightforward, for my in practice learning for talking about AI is be very careful about that. It's going to take time. The second challenge was the legacy system. I've discussed the legacy system already. So it turned out to be more challenging than even I had suspected, because it turned out we do one renewal run, and what happened in the renewal run was the person in the business side pushed the button, the mainframe churned away overnight, and spat out all the results to all the agents, the direct line, whatever it might be. So I said, okay, that's very straightforward. Just stop it, like before it spits out the results, and we'll interfere at that point. And they said, no can do. That's not going to happen. You're going to need to do something else. And therefore, we had to work out a way, how were we going to actually be able to implement what we wanted to implement? So again, if I'm trying to think forward, if what I'm using for AI is, just behind the scenes, and the reason we did renewals is that we're running it offline and the system doesn't have to interact with anything. Even that was a challenge. To have anything that's going to be working with the system directly while you're doing something that's live, and you've got a legacy system, legacy policy system, that's going to be even worse. And finally, the other challenge is, of course, data. So I'm sure no one's ever had a problem with their data. So our data was poor quality, missing stuff. It changed. So we would look at it, what we expected to be coming up in the renewal, and we'd build our models, and we'd actually reach renewal, and some not inconsiderable amount of the policyholders' policy information would have changed. So some of that was the policyholders' fault, because they will insist on changing their policy conditions and their drivers and who on a week before renewal. So there's not a lot you can do about that. But some of it was the IT systems. A lot of it was due to the IT systems, and a lot of it was these legacy rules that were sitting in the system that no one knew actually existed, that came into play. Like if you belonged to this agent number 1, 2, 3, 4, and it was, I don't know, the year ended in an even number, add 5% to the premium. Like there were rules we had no idea why they were there or why they existed, and and the moment we didn't have control over the data, so obviously then we couldn't do any of the advanced pricing we wanted because everything goes out of sync. So what did we do? How did we adapt? How did we deal with it? So firstly, teamwork, and I think that's obviously fairly straightforward. We put up a team. We dedicated people from the actuarial team, from the business side, from IT, and we found 3 key stakeholders, and they sat for hours together, going through, delving deep into what was going on in order to try and understand and how to solve it. For each of these cases where I was discussing these rules that came up, they would be like, here's a policy. We expected it to come out with renewal at whatever it was, at £500. It came out at £510. I'm minimising. They looked at the ones that came out at £600, £700 instead of what they were expecting. Why? And they went in and they said, oh, there's an old rule that exists in the system that does the following, or there's 2 things that contradict. We spent a lot of effort trying to work out what the problems were with this team. And the fact they sat together physically, I think really helped because they were all looking at the same thing and they were able to actually deal with it rapidly. In order to deal with the closed legacy system, so we created a dual run in order to get over the problem with it spitting out the data and not giving us time to interfere. We ran it once at the beginning of the month on a theoretical basis, what we call the theoretical renewals, exactly the same process we were going to run at the end of the month in order that we should have the data that we're actually going to be looking at towards the end. And we're actually setting up at the moment now a system to do a 3rd run. So we're going to have a first theoretical run. We're going to interfere with what we want to do in renewals. We're going to have another theoretical run so that we get the data, we can see what we put in, how it actually impacted before agents have a chance to play with it. Because at the moment we don't get that. Some agents, we found there's one underwriter who's so efficient, she manages to get in and interfere with the data before the computer pulls it out. I'm not quite sure how that happens, but apparently it does. And she gives a lot of discounts. I don't know why. So that's how we got over that. And finally, as I say, we adapted by really going in and looking at the data, seeing how we can improve it, looking at each error, like obviously starting with the largest ones and working our way down towards the smaller ones, because we need that, right? In order to be able to control and build models, we need to know that what we're suggesting is actually what's happening in practice. We've taken out legacy rules, like there's stuff that was in there, no one knows why. We're trying to wipe it out. We're going to end up with a much cleaner system. We're actually going to know, hopefully, what our policies are doing at renewal. And we've set up also KPIs for management. The first one we looked at was what percentage of the population are we actually managing to deal with. We found there's a whole bunch of business rules that wouldn't let us deal with renewal. We have certain anti-theft requirements for a vehicle. It turns out that every 3 years they had to be approved by the agent in order to say, yeah, they're still valid, they're still in the vehicle before the policy could be renewed. The way it was run in the system was it just blocked it. Right? It didn't bother getting to a renewal price. It just stopped. We had to take that out. Various other business rules. We've created these KPIs and we're monitoring them like every month to see how we're doing. In order to make sure that we're actually going the way we should be. And we're adding in new KPIs now, which percent of renewals are actually within the range that we've allowed. Because before that, we could say, okay, we've got some percent of business we're renewing as we should be, but again, it could be at a 5% more or 5% less than we were planning. And finally, having a strong modelling team, I think here is critical. So I put my strongest pricing actuary on the job. He has a PhD in maths, which helps, until such time as agentic AI is prepared to actually run my models for me. I think that's key to making sure, with all the intelligence and all the support you have from the system, you need someone there who really knows what they're doing in order to make sure that it's working as it should be. So where are we? Where did we get to? So we got to 90% of our population in Earnix. That's quite an achievement considering we started at 60. We have policy level control, right? Finally, like discussed the legacy systems. We were, as I said before, we could put in a price increase and we would end up with something similar, but not exact. We reached a stage where we can actually go in and look at each policy and say, okay, let's move it up and down as we want, either for price optimization or because we look at other information we're bringing in, valuable customers, customer lifetime models. Yeah, don't have one of those yet, but in theory we could. And the ability to do A/B testing, which we've had all these discussions about all these wonderful things we could do. Like previously, we couldn't do any of these, didn't control anything, and therefore it's so important to be able to know what's going on and how the market's reacting to what we're doing. In terms of the agents, and here I'm talking actual physical insurance agents and not agentic AI. So we included them in the model. They had no idea that they're being optimized, and it works. So that's a success. So anyone who's working opposite agents, it does actually work. The model has learned how the agents operate, and is able to deal with it. And I want to say, overall, we saw, the market for the last year and a half has been incredibly profitable on the motor business. Like we're just seeing now, the price is beginning to plummet. And nevertheless, so when we opted for our renewal models, we said, okay, we want to increase our renewal rates at the same level of profitability, give or take. And we said, we'll go for a 1%, 1.5% increase at the same level of profitability. The results came in and we were looking at 4% increase in renewal rates, 5% increase in renewal rates at the same level of profitability. And we said, okay, we're just, I've got a brilliant team who are obviously working amazingly well, and so they put it all together. So I was somewhat disappointed. We had a meeting with Earnix, and my boss, or the head of general insurance, asked Earnix, why do they think that the model was doing so much better than we expected? He said, yeah, you were doing so badly when you went in at the beginning. It was really easy to improve what you were doing. So I said, thanks for that. So that's very encouraging. But it's working even with the agents. And I think, and perhaps this is the most important, is that we've changed the language that we talk opposite the business side. Instead of having to select something, we say, okay, we see the loss ratio is, I don't think anyone's ever said the loss ratio is too good. Let's say the loss ratio is bad. How do we improve it? How can we put the prices up? Instead of saying, okay, we're going to have a 5% price increase across the board or 2% price increase across the board, we can say we can look at the efficient frontier and actually make a decision. And my boss, who's not an actuary and not a data scientist, he's like, okay, I want to maximize profit instead of, or maximize the renewal rates instead of profit. And that's a whole different conversation. And then we can look back and see what the impact was. So where are we going to from here? Where, we started on the journey. Where do we think it's going to take us? So definitely, there is demand. Like took me a while to convince the non-actuarial side of the company that it was something that was worth doing. But with the first successes, there's suddenly like, how can you roll that out tomorrow to all our lines of business? Yeah, okay, that might take a little while. But it's there. Like they want, where we were discussing one thing that when they see the success, so that brought the appetite for more models and more optimization, and I think it's justified. But we definitely feel the pressure now to catch up and take ourselves forward. And the next big step, which we're talking about for next year, is obviously to look at the new business and see how we can deal with that. And again, because there we're talking about stuff that's happening in real time or near real time online, and with legacy system, it's a whole different level of complexity. And the reason we haven't done that yet is we spent the last year and a half also investing in how to open up the legacy system to an API that it can actually talk to something that's outside it, or send out a request and get something back. But that's definitely where we're going next. And I think we're ready to go. So that's me. Okay, that's not really me, but that's where we're going. Thank you.